back with another review video. And again, looking at Duke, but a little bit different this time. Instead of being like, oh, we built some and then we did stuff, with Duke, which comes up sometimes. This is kind of the more straightforward look mostly, um, where more or less, well, there are some weirdo games in here as well, but more or less for the most part, these are my plan is mostly to go for Duke, for Duchy Duke pretty early on. Um, and you'll notice some common themes to some of these games. Number one, the deck control is pretty weak. The deck control is pretty weak. Duchy Duke is likely to be a relevant, important factor. Number two, there's like treasure gainers and or Duchess works kind of similarly. Um, Treasure gainers don't help a ton with hitting province, particularly like silver gainers. Um, but also you're going to see Soothsayer because it also curses. But like treasure gainers, um, like a silver gainer doesn't help you hit province very much. You need a billion silvers before you're hitting province reliably, but it helps a lot for hitting Duchy Duke, as you can like gain a silver, buy a duchy, and still be net fine in terms of being able to get to duchy reliably. I mean, it's not quite net fine. I think you're very slightly hurting usually because the variance increases, but yeah, you're pretty close to not having hurt yourself that much. So the silver gainers help a lot there. And we're going to see another cost reduction thing. Yeah, there's also just some weirdo games, but let's just jump in. And I'm going to try to cover. There's more of these games. I'm going to try to cover a lot of them. So I'm going to try to cover them pretty quickly and not go into as much detail as I did on the previous one. Again, looking for feedback here, but yeah. So this board, we had Gladiator Fortune, we had Lackeys, and Golem is kind of the only draw. Doctor is the only thinning. You could do a big mega turn thing hypothetically with Horn of Plenty, but it's going to be hard to get uh, all of the provinces with a Horn of Plenty turn, and because you're going against Duchy Duke, you kind of need to be able to go for all of them. So you could try to like get all the lackeys and some golems and a bunch of horns and then thin down a bit with the doctor and like try to gun for province. I just don't believe in it though. It's going to be pretty slow. So this was pretty straightforward for me. I played with a couple of jacks, raced down the duchies pretty early, got a lackeys, was able to spike province at some point, which seemed better than Duke, although it's kind of close. It depends on what your opponent's doing, right? But yeah, because Gardens is around, getting province is a little bit more appealing. But yeah, basically pretty straightforward. Jack gains silvers, lets you play with a lot of longevity. I was able to get 5 duchies because my opponent tried to contest. I only got 5 duchies, 5 dukes worth the bulk of my points. I also got 6 gardens at the end, so that was pretty helpful. Even though my opponent got 6 provinces and a few harems, it wasn't a big deal for me. Um, Next game's a bit of a weirdo. It was a colony board, which is pretty unusual for Duchy Duke to be relevant. And as you can see, you might want to claim, oh, Duke wasn't very relevant here because nobody gained one. Um, let's go right to the end of the game and see that nobody gained one. But so basically what happened was we soothsayered back and forth a bit. You could try to draw. There is actually some okayish draw with patrol and villa. It's not great, and there's not thinning. Although there's apothecary, and that's like kind of what my opponent tried to do, but they never got to the patrol villa stuff. Or no, they did get to the patrol villa stuff, but not only so much. The villas also running out, and the curses running out was an important part of well, really how the game actually played out. Whereas getting the 8 duchies here, the pile out helped me. Eventually, being able to draw a ton, would be very helpful for, and silos helps with this apothecary plan. But being able to draw a ton will eventually be able to, yeah, being able to draw a ton will eventually be able to get to, colonies or whatever, but uh, the pile out pressure provided by duchy piling with along with these other piles going was important. But the other important thing is, well, I think Duke is important. You can argue it isn't, but I think it is important here. I'd be pretty suspect in trying to go for these duchies if there wasn't the potential of Duke around, because it only takes, and particularly with Pageant, this is plausible, it only takes like a couple of colony spikes, and suddenly I'm in a bit of trouble if I go too hard on the duchies too fast. Um, so I would have been pretty reluctant to go for duchies if Duke weren't around, as it was actually four piled. But yeah, if if there weren't Duke here, I think I would have been much more reticent to just hammer away at these duchies, particularly because my opponent can, like I say, they can get a couple of colonies or a couple of provinces and a colony or something, and at least potentially Pageant enables them to do that. And yeah, so this is a place where it's part of the duchy is about the pile pressure, but the Duke to back it up really helps you have longevity. If they pivot away from going for piles, you're not just stuck with a deck full of green cards that does nothing. This is another, yeah, Soothsayer game with Horde. Makes going for duchies a lot more appealing. Um, so yeah, I mean that's basically what happened. Went for them pretty much straight off. I got a couple provinces. My opponent only got one province. Five duchies to my opponent's three. My opponent got way more dukes than me, which normally wouldn't really be very good for them, but it makes somewhat more sense here with the horde, right? Usually don't want to contest that much, but if you have a horde in play, well, yeah, you're still going to buy the duke, I guess. Um, yeah, pretty straightforward. Pretty much has to be Duchy Duke relevant with Soothsayer and Horde, I think. Again, you could try to build with like City Quarter and Puka to thin your coppers, but because you're going to get these curses building up from your opponent's Soothsayer, I don't really believe in trying to do that, and especially because Duchy Duke will just eventually be so many points that it's going to be problematic by the time you get up and running. And so you could try to build with City Quarter and eventually Leprechaun, Puka, whatever, but I don't really believe in it. Let's move on to the next game. Um, yeah, there were. This one's a little bit strange. You see, there's Temple trashing. That's the only trash. There's mine, and I think I opened mine, or I got it very early anyway. Um, yeah, so I opened. Well, there's tax also, right? And tax is kind of weird with Duchy Duke because the taxes can fly on either the provinces or the duchies, or the dukes. Um, so it's just it can be very strange. Um, but I go page silver, so I don't open mine, but I get mine pretty quick. Um, Page gives us a lot of treasures between Treasure Hunter and Hero. Um, Eventually, there's a lot of this game's just very strange. But basically, the only draw again, this is the important bit. The only draw is, well, champion is going to be all your villages that you ever need, but there's and it defends you from legionary, which is kind of important eventually. But there's no thinning other than temple, which is thinning, which you could go for that. And apparently, we did at some point go for a lot of it. But anyway, the only draw is the important bit. There's no extra gains to get extra motes other than pawn. I don't know. You could have built here. I guess there's ball. You could have built here, I guess, but as you can see, tax-wise, let's look at how tax played into this game. Um, let's try to get there from the top. Oh my. Okay. Yeah. Basically, I won this game off of mine, which is again kind of this treasure gainer. So here that was a tax on duchy because I'd already gotten duchy, but I basically just blow through it. I imagine that I tax province here. So there's a lot of taxes going back and forth, but I just bite the bullet and go through them because it's not really something that you can do. I don't know. This game is weird, and maybe Duke isn't good here in the overall, but it was for me. I think I got a lot of silvers from. Well, you can see I had a lot of treasure hunters, so this was basically my plan. Is I got a lot of silvers, and the silver gainer. At this point I had a bunch of treasure hunters, and the silver gainer. Yeah, again helps out. Um, Okay, next let's look at this game. This game you could have tried to build something with mill and crossroads and stables and patron. But so you can definitely draw, but there isn't much in terms of extra gains. There's just like zombie zombie mason, and that's hard to set up. And then the coffers, like villain helps against that plan and just helps in general. Mill also pretty good with Duchy Duke. It helps you have a deck that's full of green and still be able to hit your 5 pretty consistently. Sinister Plot is good as normal. Um, yeah, so my opponent didn't really try for the crossroads. I mean, they tried for that a little bit, right? They had a couple stables, a couple crossroads, but yeah, I mean, mostly they contested me, but again, 5 duchies, 5 dukes, and even though they got 3 of each, um, it wasn't enough. Now, by the end of the game here, if they could province, they'd be in good shape. They need a province a couple times, but I only need 3 more mills to be the third pile. So that's the other important thing here is I have this clear third pile in sight. Otherwise, if their deck is okay, right, if they province 3 times, that gets them 18 more points. That gets them to 52. If they province twice more, then my 3 mills will tie. I'm a little surprised they resigned when they did because I don't know, 3 provinces seems plausible, but on the other hand, it's actually quite hard for them to province because their deck is they've got a couple stables and a couple crossroads and a few mills, a ton of green cards and almost no money. So they need to draw most of their money, right? They have 9 money in deck, and then they can get some more money off of these mills, but it's hard for them to be able to province a lot more. And also plot, I don't know how the plot situation was here. They had just drawn off theirs, and when's the last time I've drawn off mine? It's very possible that I can, I do have a coffers. It's plausible that I can province once here, um, which, well, the longer game may not favor me, but being able to province once is gonna hurt them a bit, I think. Yeah, I mean, I only have a couple of things on my plot map, but anyway, yeah, there was this game. Mill, um, Mill indicated villain helps a bit as well. Particularly if they weren't if they're trying to rely on stables copper crossroads kind of draw, then that villain attack uh, really actually hurts because their crossroads get hurt. Hurts more than it normally would because it's gonna hurt some piece of their draw probably. Okay, next game. This game was really weird. This is a game I lost where I don't really quite understand, but basically it looked like probably not Duchy Duke to me very much, but there were very long on replaces and using that to try to do encampment plunder stuff. And then out of the blue, my opponent just starts spamming replacing into Duchy, and yeah, I contested, but I didn't really see what I could do. My deck is not really good enough to province very consistently. I'm not scoring that many points off plunder. I mean, I do have a few plunders, but I can't see them often enough. Again, real important thing here, the deck control is not very good. There's some oracles and there's coin of the realm and there's encampments, but the thinning is not good, and yeah, I really got blindsided and Zyrex just took me out, going for 6 duchies and a few dukes, and just buried me. Um, Yeah, embargo also a bit weird, but helpful to me here. Again, the only draw is like Ironmonger, the only reliable draw, Ironmonger and Faithful Hound. So again, deck control is weak, trashing basically non-existent. There's, the one gift, and I don't really consider, well, thinning is basically non-existent. And then there's Duchess here, so that helps out a lot. We can see I was able to get 6 duchies, 6 dukes, easy peasy. I got 4 islands as well, and some extra estates by the end. Almost all the green cards were gotten, but at the end, we'll see. Yeah, basically, you can't get the last province, you can't get the last duke, you can't get the last island. I've basically maxed out all the points from the board. Where I say embargo was important was at some point. Where did that get trashed? I get it. I buy the embargo here on turn 12, right? I've gotten 6 duchies already. I could have gotten a silver, but I get the embargo because I know that the only way my opponent has back in the game is through province, and so I just want to embargo that. Now, I didn't actually end up getting to play it for another several turns. See, I got it on turn 12. My deck is so thick I didn't see the embargo until turn 19, which is about the longest it could have been. So that actually hurt me a bit here, but just having the huge duchy lead was fine and was plenty enough. And yeah, the way that the end game dancing played out, almost all of these points went down, but Duchess was quite helpful here. Squire could be silver gaining or whatever, but wasn't really that impactful. Taxman may be worth a look. I don't know. In the mirror, it's probably okay. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, and then if they go for embargo too early, then I just pivot out of doing Duchy Duke and go into province. They could have gotten it later on, of course, but by then when they're placing it, my dukes are about as good as his provinces. So, and both of us getting cursed because our stuff is embargoed is favorable to me, the player who A has more points and so has a pile out leverage, and B, I only need to hit 5 instead of 8, so adding extra bad cards to both decks is good for me, since there's no way to trash there. This game, yeah, so this one is interesting. It looks like you can build here. There's hideout and catacombs, so you have thinning, you have a village, you have draw, you have extra gains. It looks like you have everything you want. There's also Duchess for me as a Duchy Duke player, and as well as Bureaucrat. So those are a couple of things that help me. The problem, the problem with trying to build to draw here, it looks like there's draw, but you run out of stuff. You just run out of stuff for your villages to feed on, since your hideouts need to be able to trash things. You're gonna run out of trashable things, and so like you need to be able to trash an estate to give you a curse, to give you 2 things to trash. You could trash a catacombs to give you an estate, to give you a curse, to give you a couple things to trash. But basically, it looks like, well, there's cards that give you extra gains here. What's the issue? Like there's Bureaucrat, there's Nomad Camp. The problem is each one of those cards requires a terminal space. Basically, takes a village to play an extra one. So you're not actually getting more village space by, like, I gain a silver and then I trash the silver. But to gain the silver, I had to play an extra hideout. So I'm not getting extra stuff to be able to draw more. So in reality, over the long haul, the thinning, or the deck control dies out because you run out of stuff, you run out of things to trash, you run out of the ability to play enough hideouts. So your deck, and this is exactly what happened to my opponent, is they got to where they're drawing, but then they're just treading water, right? They buy something and then they trash it, and they end up with, they eventually found pillage as a way to give them a couple of things, but there's so many, um, there's basically, it's so much extra work to get a pillage, to have an extra village play, and the pillages are going to run out. And yeah, the attack hurts, but only so much. So it ends up being that I was able to get 7 duchies, and I only got 1 duke before my opponent resigned here, but 7 duchies, a bunch of extra silvers. These bureaucrats were helpful. My opponent's bureaucrats and pillages did hurt me, so like I only have 7 duchies and 1 duke after 18 turns. But lots of duchesses and bureaucrats. I have like a ton of terminals. But yeah. Anyway, this one was about that. Let's go to the next one. Um, yeah, this one's a bit of another slightly strange one. But the big factor here is battlefield. So battlefield encourages you to get green cards sooner than your opponent. So it encouraged me to go Duchy Duke here, and I played with just basically gear and and arrays to get rid of these estates because they're still pesky. But yeah, gear and money and yeah, just took so many six duchies, five dukes, and was even still able to get a few provinces. Just yeah, just buying things one at a time. Game took forever, but I have a million points, and there just wasn't ever going to happen for province player here. But the battlefield is another thing that indicates Duchy Duke. The discard attack hurts from mercenary, but only so much. So this was a nice skip mercenary, go for Duke board. This game was also a little bit of a weird one because there's Orchard. There could be Cathedral, but Duchy Duke is like the one thing that I've found that actually makes you not want a Cathedral so much. Um, Very important that there's no draw here other than Tactician, which there's no way to really do double Tactician. The only um, virtual money that doesn't require treasure is Amulet, and it's not like you're going to be playing 8 amulets in a turn. So, um, so there's basically no draw again. So I went for a trader-based strategy again, gaining a lot of silvers. Silvers actually piled. Um, was able to get a couple provinces before the game ended, just because again I have these Mondo things, and then because Orchard's around, I kind of went for 3 of everything strats, along with all the duchies and dukes, which piled relatively quickly because my opponent contested me, getting 3 duchies and then probably more dukes than they should have. Um, so yeah, I get 3 warehouses and 3 border guards and 3 traders and 3 merchants, and yeah, just 3 of everything for extra orchard points, province or 2, bunch of duchies, some dukes. Um, After the duchies run, you do want to build some in a lot of cases still. This game was more about Young Witch than anything, I think. So crop rotation definitely helps Duchy Duke because you want to keep the green cards around. There is thinning here in the form of upgrade. Um, there isn't so much of a village to help you be able to draw. You can kind of eventually hypothetically make a play with Prince on Cellar or maybe Vassal if you're very lucky. But yeah, basically there's no village. It's important to say that Vassal is the bane. So, but there's thinning in terms of upgrade, which is my opponent goes for that, and they're gonna use that to try to combat my Young Witch and opening with the second Young Witch soon forthcoming. The early Vassal is such a weak bane because you just can't take that many actions here due to the lack of village that nobody ever gets one. So I basically cursed my opponent into oblivion, and then Young Witch. Uh, well, basically going for duchies helps me close out the game a lot more than anything else. Crop rotation also helps it, but getting the duchies down just means that even if my opponent starts to getting to like double province, it's going to be tough. Well, they're not going to be able to get to double province, but basically I closed the door, and the Young Witch with the extra green cards in hand, filtering out, just going to be more useful for going for Duchy Duke anyway. Um, Even though it was really more the Young Witch that won the game, it's more conducive to this Duchy Duke strategy than anything else, than to going for provinces, basically. Um, and then this was such a weird game. You can see it lasted approximately forever, 32 turns, um, and I won by not very much. Forgot the last province here. Um, Now, there's sewers, there's alms, there's cargo ship, there's bureaucrat again, which helps. But the big thing was there was knights. So like very deep into this game, I had gotten an early province because that's the way I thought the game was going to go. There was these knights. But the knights battle goes on forever. You can see 17 turns in, nobody's touched duchy or duke. We have knights going on. Eventually, around the time where the knights are gone, I start into duchy duke because I think that's kind of where my deck is favored. I've got a couple of bureaucrats and a vault, which also helps for duchy duke, kind of. Um, and this hunting grounds, which I think was a relic from when it might have gotten hit by knights, and given me a free duchy. So you don't want to go duchy duke too early because the knights will just kill you. I mean, the knights will kill you anyway. You want to play the knights a lot. There is some thinning here, and there's kind of draw. Like there's sewers and sacrifice to help you thin, and there's royal carriage is kind of a village, but with a lack of non-terminals. There's only sacrifice on other actions or Dame. Which one's the no, Natalie's the gainer. Anna is the trash. Whichever the action knight is. Those are like your only plus action cards. So anyway, the point being, like by the time that the knight's battle is over, I figure that Duchy Duke is the way to go because it's not like the decks have a plethora of draw and the treasures playing for the long game. Basically, I think Duchy Duke ends up being favored, and I get behind in points um, pretty substantially, like around here, because the Dukes haven't been touched yet. I have 4 duchies. My opponent's gotten 1. My opponent has a lot more provinces than me, and so they have some more points here. But I just count on their deck stalling out. I mean, my deck's also going to stall to some extent, but it's just much easier to hit 5 than it is to hit 8, and that's what Duchy Duke lets you do. So I finished draining the duchies here. I'm behind by 10. There's only 2 provinces left, but it's not so easy to get to those 2 provinces for my opponent. And that's basically what helps me here. They contest dukes at this point, which they only have 2 duchies, so I'm not totally sure how good of a plan that is. But yeah, I mean, they only do it basically at the start of the shuffle here. So I guess they're saying I'm going to be able to win or lose. This is going to be the last shuffle. I'm unlikely to see these cards again. So it's not that bad of a play, and it's potentially possible that they can win by like draining out the Duke pile, right? If they get 1 province and then we and then we and then they get a Duke and then I get a Duke, it's like a tie. So it's not that bad of a plan, but anyway, it works out that I'm able to get my second province here right at the very end, which again, these kinds of decks that treasure flood is going to happen sometimes. So a whole bunch of games where I think Duchy Duke was, if not very good, then at least quite relevant. And I think the biggest themes again are gaining treasures, especially silvers, to some extent gold, particularly with Soothsayer, if that's your gold gainer because of the junking. Um, Lack of deck control makes you really want to key in on Duchy Duke because it's going to be hard to drain all the provinces if they can't have very strong deck control going on. Um, and then there's some other factors like we saw battlefield was an important factor once. We've seen cost reduction be important a couple of times, and then there have been a few cases where the duchy pile giving you points faster actually positions you well in terms of pile outs, and then you're using the duke as kind of this backup to strengthen your hand in case your pile out plan isn't necessarily going to plan because they pivot away from the piles that would get you down to the 3rd pile and they start going for provinces faster. You can then transition into, well, I have Duchy Duke as a backup and I'm fine. So it's like a combination Duchy Duke and pile pressure from Duchy's play in some cases. But yeah, Duchesses, treasure gainers, lack of deck control is the big thing. lack of deck control is really the biggest thing that points you towards going for. Um, my game plan is really built around Duchy Duke more or less from the beginning. But there's also a bunch of weirdo situations as we've seen. Anyway, hopefully you were able to find this useful. Please let me know if you have any comments or questions, etc. And we'll see you again with a later review video, which will probably just be over a single game, um, where we'll look in more depth at a particular game. I have some interesting games from my backlog that I didn't record live, but would still like to go over. And yeah, anyway, please let me know what you think, and we'll talk to you again later. Thanks for watching.